let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty. This much we pledge and more.
If you've ever found yourself saying things like, history is boring, and this sort of perception of history stems from a sleep-inducing high school teacher or college professor, but you would like to find why some people like myself are so interested in the topic, well, you have come to the right place. Join me as I take an in-depth look at extraordinary historical events that I find both phenomenally interesting and exciting. Through my analysis of these cataclysmic epochs, I will attempt to draw parallels with these past events and the current state of affairs across the globe. As President John F. Kennedy once said, history is a relentless master. It has no present, only the past, rushing into the future. To try to hold fast is to be swept aside. Now, welcome to Historical Ripples. Let's go drop a pebble in this water. Hello everyone, I just wanted to provide a quick introduction about this interview that I had with a self-proclaimed Leninist, Boston Sullivan, who also happens to be one of my best friends. It was a fantastic time talking to him. We talk about politics, talk about history all the time over text message, and every once in a while on the phone. He's a very busy man. I'm somewhat busy. And we finally decided, you know what, we're going to record this and put this up, and I had a fantastic time. I believe he had a fantastic time, and I hope everyone listening to this will approach it with an open mind, hear him out, really think about what he is saying, and come up with your own decisions, not simply based on the status quo of all leftism being bad and horrible, which it very well might be. I'm not qualified to make that judgment. But with that being said, I'm a big freedom of speech guy, as anyone who listens to me or knows me knows, and I like hearing different perspectives, and that is exactly what you're going to hear in this interview. So, with that being said, please enjoy, and welcome to Historical Ripples, and I hope that you all will join myself and Boston Sullivan in dropping a pebble in this historic water. Cool. Well, it's recording. Hi, Boston.
Hello, Dylan.
How are you doing?
I am well.
Well, that is good. That is good to hear. So, this is going to be my first interview for my podcast, and before I get into opening and introducing you, I'd like to just maybe do a quick overview of what I'm trying to do with these. So my idea is to have a very free, just open conversation with people, with the central theme being revolved around history. We are going to get into politics. We're going to talk about politics. It's just going to happen. And I mean, not to mention most history, all of history has to do with politics to some extent or another. So it is just going to happen. And why I like that though, is because just about every single political event that is going on contemporarily has historical ties. Everything. Like, in order to understand the present today, you have to have at least a minor understanding of the past. And that is kind of where my show, Historical Ripples, came from. When people do things in the past, they may not see the immediate consequences right away, but what they're doing is they're dropping that pebble in the water, it ripples out, and eventually becomes waves. My favorite example to cite about that is the 1953 Iranian Revolution, which goes back even further than that. If you go back to, Sykes-Picot, and really you could go back to World War One. And World War One it's like the defining event of our time period, I believe. But that's just an example, because World War One led to Sykes and Picot getting in there, messing with the Middle East. That eventually leads to the revolution in 1953 in Iran, and then that leads to the 1979 Islamic fundamentalist revolution, and then that leads to where we are today with the Trump administration killing Husani or Khomeini? Khomeini, right? Was his name?
Are you talking about General Soleimani?
Soleimani, correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
No,
General
I
Soleimani.
forgot about that too.
Yeah. There's been so much going on in the news. But basically everything has ties.
Oh.
Huh?
I said that was this January.
Yeah.
Wow.
A lot has happened between then and now. Okay, so now I'm going to kind of turn it over to you. I'm going to ask you one quick question, and well, not a quick question, but a question that I think will allow you to say sort of what you're about in a nutshell. So,
Okay.
Boston Sullivan. Everyone, this is Boston Sullivan, by the way. He's a very good friend of mine from the University of Montana. But you're going to hear what he thinks throughout this entire discussion. So, Boston, please tell me what your political ideology is and how you came to believe in it. Did something happen in your life that I'm going to assume that you call yourself a leftist?
Yes.
Okay. So, did something happen in your life, something pivotal that turned you toward leftism in general? And what examples similar to those sort of events that you may have experienced that converted you to a leftist would you want other people to pay attention to?
That's a very strong question. In fact, I'll start off by answering your question directly. I am a self-described communist. On a more specific theoretical tangent, I am a Marxist-Leninist of the Vladimir Lenin, Joseph Stalin, and Leon Trotsky and Bukharin kind of vein. I specialize primarily in the histories of the Soviet Union, of the U.S. labor movement, and a lot of Latin American and West African communist movements, with a small emphasis on Vietnam in between. Kind of what made me a communist, the Marxist answer would be many things did, which is true. But if I were to pinpoint a particular point in my life that brought me here, I would say where I was born significantly shaped this kind of understanding of the world. I was born in a very poor neighborhood in Casper, Wyoming, and you don't really have ghettos in a place like Wyoming, but it was probably one of the worst trailer parks I probably could have ever lived or witnessed in my life. I was only there until I was about 5 or 6 years old, so I didn't really, think really hard or was able to really experience or contemplate these kinds of experiences. But I lived in a place that was primarily full of Lakota Native Americans. I was like one of 3 white children. There were some Black people, some Mexicans, Dominicans, a varying array of Hispanic people. And it was over-policed, many police officers at all times showing up, coming in, coming out, doing this, doing that. We oftentimes got into vandalism, a lot of petty crime. It's not like we weren't edgy gangsters or anything. We just broke windows, messed with dumpsters, did graffiti, things like that.
Right.
And I witnessed a lot of racial discrimination, like just a lot as a child, and I never understood it. I was friends with Native Americans. I was friends with Black people. I wasn't really sure what was going on. My mother struggled with drugs. My father died at a young age, so we had no money to support ourselves. Things like we didn't have insulation. We had to get a bunch of roommates in order to afford a place to live. And I ended up being taken care of by some old lady for the most part, because my mom was working 12-hour days just to make sure we had enough money. And I didn't really think about that for a long time. I kind of went through my life just kind of ignoring all of that and not really considering the kind of impacts it has on people. And, I encounter Bernie Sanders, of course, and he's not a socialist by any degree, and we'll probably get into that later. He just has a lot of reformist views, and his rhetoric kind of made me start to think, oh, I experienced poverty, and, why would a system I'm born under treat me that way? Like, what's going on here? This isn't just some sort of like, individuals pull themselves up by their bootstraps kind of scenario. I was treated wrongly as a child. I was born into this world in an unfair place. And now, barring race and gender and all those other things, I was not in an advantaged position. I just wasn't. I went to public school and I barely made it through elementary school. I have a varying degree of mental illnesses and things that make my life more difficult, but it was never an advantage. And I've skirted by. I had no health care until the age of 18. I literally just didn't have any health care at all, and I skirted through that without getting sick. If I hadn't, my mom would have gone bankrupt. And all of these things kind of just coalesced together 4 years ago, and I just snapped, and I was like, this makes so much sense. I shouldn't have survived this. Through sheer luck, I have maneuvered through capitalism somehow, and now I'm watching it fall apart in real time with my own eyes. And after I started reading Marx and Lenin, I would like to say that Bernie Sanders had no influence on me being a socialist. People think that he's a crazy communist or whatever, and he's not. He's very run-of-the-mill for someone like me. I actually just was interested in Marx. I played historical video games that had the Soviet Union, and sometimes their music was really good. And I was like, oh, these guys seem kind of cool. They have the color red. What could be wrong with them? And that's just what happened. I just kind of analyzed my own personal life, found Marx, started reading him, and I was like, it felt like I had been seen and understood by a man from 140 years ago, and just never really went back. You learn his philosophy and it just sticks with you, and I wish it was easy to just throw it off. If I wanted to, I could just be like, oh, not a communist anymore if I needed to, in a regime that doesn't like me. I would love to just, not, but it has completely changed my thinking at a fundamental level, and it informs how I read history. It informs how I discuss with people. It has changed the way I empathize and understand and interact with the world forever, and I will never be able to change that. And that's why I am a proud, upstanding, and optimistic Marxist of the 21st century, despite all the things my ideology has gone through.
Yeah. So, I mean, to me, from that last part that you said about it would be easy to just brush off my ideology to reform to what is more normal. To me, it sounds like you're definitely choosing the path of least no, you're not choosing the path of least resistance. You are, did I say that right? Yeah. You are convictious. You have convictions. And communism, I mean, whether you agree with the ideology or not, I think it is undeniable to say that it is a insurgent ideology. It is a ideology that is constantly under attack. I mean, communism basically is a synonym with evil in American society. So you have a big hurdle to climb or to jump over just even saying that you are a communist, because people you're exactly right. People will say, oh, Bernie Sanders is a communist, when no, if you do a little research into communism, I'm not a communist, but I've done a little bit of looking into it, and the very little I've looked into it, I can tell right away that it's not Bernie, and from my conversations with you and your take on him and your take on people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and everyone who the right and left alike, well, the right and the Democrats alike, like to demonize, they're not communist. And it's just a very good catch-all term to say I view the term communism as a term that is, used today to demonize anyone who doesn't agree with the state in some sort or another. But before we get going off into this, I want to ask you one more introductory question about yourself. So so you're a history nerd. Absolutely, right? When would you say you became a history nerd? Would it be about the same time you were looking into Marx? Were you into it before that? Did it, you know what I'm saying? When did you when would you say you really started looking into history and loving it?
If we're talking specifically about the love for history, because there is a difference between loving history and learning history, and a lot of people
absolutely
tend to do the first and do the second, and it's not quite the same. So to answer your question in that sense, when I first started loving history, I was about 11, 12 years old. I had moved to this town that was like super small. You know, the school had 40 kids, and that was like high school and junior high combined, and then like the elementary school had 20 children. It was a desolate place, but there was this teacher, and you know, I don't know where she is right now or what she's doing, or if she's even alive. She was very old when I was in school, and you know, it's been a while since I was a seventh grader. She just had this overwhelming passion for it. I can't even begin to describe. Like, I don't even know if I could match it. It's just it was just so, it filled the room, you know? And she had this reputation at school for being a sort of lady dictator. Like, she could maybe make Thatcher quake, you know? She had tall heels. You could hear her coming from a mile away. She had this like steely gaze. Sorry, I'm being a little nostalgic.
No, you say whatever you want to say. I'm just typing in some more questions as I'm thinking of them. Keep going.
Awesome. Thank you. What ended up happening is we talked about Montana history, and now people say the words Montana history, and half the time it's a big groan. Everyone's like, oh, you know, the copper kings and yada yada, and the great fire.
Self-included. I usually groan at the term Montana history. Yep.
Oh yeah, because like for the most part, we're an interesting state, but I mean, a lot of other Midwestern states had like the same exact problems. Yeah. You know, Montana is a settler state. We came in, we killed a bunch of people, and then we extracted the resources. Boom, done easy. You know, it's a very similar pattern to a lot of other states in the U.S. More on that later, of course. But she like gave us sources that were like pro-Native American, and arguably she was what we would call a sentimentalist, someone who didn't understand Native struggle, but like sympathized with it. Right. And still provided us sources that were so I learned from the very beginning that the U.S. Army was not exactly a great institution. Yeah. And that was one of the many forces that made me become a communist, because anti-imperialism is a core of our ideology. And she gave us a lot of sources about Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull and Red Cloud and, you know, killing Custer and why they took the Black Hills and all these other things. We got to look into Lewis and Clark and all this other stuff. And, you know, she took one of the driest historical topics you could think of. And I'm sorry to anyone who, you know, enjoys this a lot. And made it like immensely interesting in a way that I didn't even know you could. Right. She would like speak like a dialect of the Lakotan language, like in class. I mean, this old white woman who, you know, her husband's the math teacher, and they sometimes are, you know, traveling abroad. Like, she has very, you know, she has a small world she's lived in, and yet she's so fascinated and able to create these scenarios for us to understand. And, you know, even kids who were like the jocks and the sporty types who never like read or did history, they thought she was awesome, you know? And I just have forever been impressed by that level of consistency and interest and passion. And, you know, I hope to emulate that myself one day. And
see, that's so interesting, because I mean, 9 out of 10 people you talk to, you're like, hey, what do you think about history? Most of the time, they're going to say, it's boring. Who cares? You know, it's the past, or whatever you say. Yeah. And I believe that most of that stems from poor educators. I think that most of that stems from, you know, you're in the U.S. school system, modeled after the Prussian school system. You know, you go kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade. You graduate college, get a job or don't go to college or whatever, die. That's kind of how it's navigated. And I think a lot of these teachers that we have had, myself included, I had one basketball coach teacher that just was, you know, he was a basketball coach and his side gig was teaching history, whatever. And I never was into history up until like maybe 2 years ago. And it's because it's not taught well. And I think a big part of something being taught well is exactly what your teacher was taught, is exactly how your teacher was. She was passionate about it. She thought it was important to make people understand history, which I do the same. And that ultimately, I guess I would say that's ultimately the goal of this little show, this little podcast, to try to get people interested in history. Because as you know, you're much more educated than I am. You are planning on being a professor, whatever. Me, I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I do know I'm interested in history, and I'm not qualified. I'm going to steal the Dan Carlin line. I'm no historian, obviously, but I'm interested in it. Like, I'm constantly trying to learn about it. I don't know nearly enough. I don't think I ever will. And I just want to like get some conversations going with people that maybe people will listen to this and watch this and be like, wow, that was interesting. Okay. You know what? I'm going to go look into some of this stuff that they're talking about and develop my own opinions. And yeah, that's basically what I'm trying to do here. So I appreciate that. And before we keep building on this little conversation, I think maybe we should get into my first kind of question I wanted to talk to you about.
Yeah.
So, Lord Acton. Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Great men are almost always bad men, even when they exercise influence and not authority. Still, more when you superadd the tendency of the certainty of corruption by authority. Despotic power is always accompanied by corruption of morality. Authority that does not exist for liberty is not authority, but force. Everybody likes to get as much power as circumstances allow, and nobody will vote for a self-denying ordinance. Absolute power demoralizes. So I love that quote. Most people really only know the first part, you know, power, absolutely. But there's more to it than that. My favorite part of that is the great men are almost always bad men, because it goes against the whole great man theory of history, where for the longest time, it was just, you know, Caesar, Winston, Churchill, whoever. They're the ones who are steering history. And then the new sort of thought, which is, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's more of a Marxist approach, actually, where it's like there are trends, there are forces that are like underneath the surface that are causing it. And like my take is that it's a combination between these trends and forces type theories that create history and create historical events combined with the great man theory. And I think a lot of people have a similar take of that. I think that's kind of, it seems like the more status quo is what people believe from what I've read. But so basically my take is there are always forces going on in society from the bottom up that are causing things to happen. And then a great man or great woman, great whoever, steps into place, and I believe they are usually out for their own self-interest and are usually out to do something for themselves, to write their names down in history, but they attach themselves to these trends and these forces that are going on. And if you have a little bit of great character, great ambition, they make stuff happen. And I think it's just the victors write history. These people, like Caesar, when he conquered Gaul, what did he do? He wrote a book about it, right? Great piece of propaganda. And that's why I think so many people look at it as a great man theory, like, oh, well, it was just a great man doing it. Like, no, there's so much more going on underneath the surface. This great person just came in and took over this movement, recognized these forces, and figured out how to promote themselves or promote their state, promote whatever. But so that's my take. I think it's a combination between great man theory and like great forces and trends. So my question to you about that quote by Lord Acton, he was I believe, an 18th century classic liberal from England, I believe. What do you think about that quote? And one more piece to that question. If absolute power does absolutely corrupt, what do you have to say about the United States being the most, without a doubt, the most powerful empire, state, whatever you want to call it, in history? And what does that say? If they have the absolute power of the world, are they absolutely corrupt, not correct? So so basically sorry, I said a lot there. What do you think about that quote by Lord Acton? And what do you think about my little add-on? Well, not my add-on. I heard it from a Dangerous History podcast. What is your take on that idea? That if absolute power, so do you agree with this quote? And if you do, what is your take on the United States being the most absolute power, most powerful state in all of world history?
Yeah, so I just want to start off by saying these are awesome. Absolutely thought-provoking questions. I expected at least this quality. This is definitely, impressive. So thank you for giving me something very exciting to look forward to and for delivering on that promise.
Oh, we'll do it again, Boston. We'll do it again.
Oh, yes. For sure, yes. Now, to answer your first question, it's a great quote. I agree with you. Absolutely, absolutely, of course.
Of course, right?
Yeah. Absolutely great quote. And I think when we consider power, there's a term that we consider a lot when historians study oppressed groups versus oppressor groups. And power is the same anywhere. Power is the universal language of governance. Every state, nation, dynasty, and so forth has wielded power almost the same way that any other state, nation, or dynasty has wielded power. It's just how we govern, and it's how we draw consent of the governed, and so on and so forth. And what we call power when it comes to studying these oppressor versus oppressed groups is we call the power of liberation and the power of oppression. And these are two very different things. The same things with the violence of oppression and the violence of liberation. And from my understanding of all of this is power can be a corrupting force. In fact, it often is. However, I think your ideology is more important. There's a quote by a famous West African Marxist by the name of Thomas Sankara, and he once remarked that a person with a gun
just spoke a little bit. Sorry, everyone.
It's okay.
Keep going. Sorry.
A person with a gun is just a criminal. Now, a person with an ideology is essentially a soldier, a freedom fighter.
Yeah, it's the same. Real quick, it's like how it's the whole thing people talk about with terrorists, right?
Yeah.
It's depending on your perspective, they're either terrorists or they're freedom fighters.
Precisely. And wherever you fit on the power spectrum, or even if you're an oppressor or if you're an oppressed and you side with the oppressor, your perspective changes. And, people are so willing to think that power itself is just bad, and that's where you get anarchists often. They don't like authority, so they just banish all of it.
Right.
And not to get too deep into that, but that's why Marxists disagree with them, because they don't think power is completely bad.
Marxists don't think power is completely bad.
No, yeah, that's true.
Gotcha.
And power, I think, to fully directly answer the question, does not corrupt absolutely. Neither does absolute power. When we think of absolute power, we think of the absolutists. We think of Louis XIV. We think of
I am the state.
Yeah, I am the state. Like the Prussian, army with a state kind of thing. But when we really consider power, we just need to look at every single government ever created. All of them have power. every single one. I mean, even the smallest Native American tribe that has like 40 people, the man or woman who governs that tribal like unit has power. And those societies in particular were fond of mutual aid, which is helping each other. And there's a study recently just published in the Science Journal, the main just science journal called Science. And we're learning that humans actually successfully survived due to their proclivity towards empathy. We did not survival of the fittest, kill everyone and get our way. We actually had the most effective ways of taking care of one another, which prolonged our lifespans and allowed us to share knowledge. And
while we're on that topic, that probably is something that is not going to be spread very much, because that, to me, that directly opposes the idea of imperialism, and it directly opposes that idea. And states today, most major states, ours included, have a history of imperialism. So if all of a sudden a new scientific revelation comes through that competition, because it might take social Darwinism, right, is justification for imperialism, the strong will survive, right? And if this scientific thing comes out about people might start to be like, well, why the hell did we do all this imperialism? And that just hurts the history of the state, right?
Yes. And we see people will often say that war is a natural consequence of whatever. I'm a bit of a pacifist myself, so whenever I hear those kinds of things, I roll my eyes. I'm like, okay. But I'll be fair. I'll treat this subject fairly. I'll keep the biases out as much as I can. War is less a natural consequence of man's underpinnings. 1 second.
Hey, he's just muted right now. Don't worry, everyone. He's just going in. So anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit about something. Oh, he might be back.
Sorry about that.
No, you're totally good. You're totally good, boss.
This part out, and we can just continue.
Yeah.
So my experience with the whole idea of power, and especially when you brought up imperialism, is that people need to get resources from somewhere, and in a system where you assume scarcity is the norm, so capitalism, you assume that there's less of something than there ever will be more of, and that things are not renewable. You're gonna steal from someone. I mean, it's not, there's the whole adage of free market. The free market is benefited by trade, and trade, only comes through peace. Well, you can't exactly establish peace by just walking up to someone and being like, let's trade. Maybe some people on the planet don't want to trade with you. Maybe some people don't really care about commerce. They're a sustenance-based economy. They only do things to sustain. They don't do things to proliferate. And the problem with that is that the economies that must grow and grow and grow, i.e. capitalism, the United States, is you need to have trade. And you can't just stop trading. You have to keep growing, so you have to keep trading. And you eventually start to take out, nations and such that never asked for your trading opportunities or your resources or so on. And that's where imperialism comes in.
Right, as Lenin would say, what? Imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, correct?
Yeah. And, it's not that war is natural. It's that we have never been able to create a society at the current moment in time that abolishes scarcity. We have always needed workers. The thing with, if you consider Marx's historical model, slave states didn't have a lack of resources. They didn't have enough workers to proliferate. So they conquered entire groups of people and used them as slaves because they didn't have the labor to build these grand construction projects like the Colosseum and the Parthenon, and and that's where Sparta failed. Sparta didn't have any labor because they just went to war all the time. Athens, was successful because they they had enough men to, do things. Sparta just lost all of its men in these crazy conflicts, and
Well, if a society is
well,
built around war and fighting, and you're training all your children to be warriors, and that's your thing, is fighting, like eventually you're going to come across someone who is going to beat you, and that's exactly what happened with Philip of Macedonia. Alexander's father, he destroyed Sparta, correct? Or did he destroy Athens?
Well, Athens and Sparta. Unfortunately, the Greek states got destroyed a lot. There were a few times where they were down on their luck, and it wasn't. The Macedonians, however, they are just at that particular point in time. They developed a more advanced form of the phalanx. They had pikes. Mm-hmm. Greeks had spears, Macedonians had pikes, and through the sheer force of just longer sticks, the Macedonians destroyed the Greek hoplite units because the hoplites just couldn't poke far enough, which is a silly, crazy way to go. Oh, that's how they lost a war. Ooh, that's so simple, but that's how it used to be.
Mm-hmm. If whoever had the technological advancement, almost won every time, just about.
And at that time, we didn't have any understanding of guerrilla warfare or how to take down a state that's stronger than you.
While we're talking about this, I would like to get your take on the difference between the Western way of war and the Eastern way of war. Because my understanding is the Western way of war is about decisive battles. It is about, to me, it feels like war is more used as a propaganda machine in the West. Mm-hmm. It is more used to be look at how great we are. We beat Nazi Germany in this battle. Where Eastern way of war, to my understanding, is more calculated, more Sun Tzu, more... They don't rely on one single battle. They work their way and they try to win. And then we're getting in a rabbit hole, I'm sure now we can start talking about guerrilla warfare and all that. But what's your take on the difference between the Western way of war and the Eastern way of war?
To make this easy, I'll answer this question, then I'll answer your second question about the U.S. empire being the most powerful in the world.
Perfect. I forgot I even asked that.
Great. Awesome. I want to help get us to more questions. I love where we're going, but I know you have a planned route for us. So I don't want to go on the mic to, argue with you really hard, but I don't like when, and I mean this through studies, not through a personal opinion. From what I've absorbed, I don't like splitting the world between East and West.
Right.
I think it's a bit arbitrary. I understand why people do it.
Very arbitrary.
There are many reasons to perceive a barrier just because of how wildly different the cultures are. I know people who've gone to China and they've come back humiliated because they don't know how to communicate over there. And that's completely, even if you know Mandarin, you still don't understand the social norms. And so I can understand why you might think there's a barrier there, but I don't think there is. I think people who are truly interested in learning about each other will try. And if they are not, then they have failed and they aren't going to try again and they've made up their mind. So anyways, I think to consider the different ways of, I'm going to try and answer your question as best as I can with the frame provided. I think one thing we've noticed, especially with colonialism, is that Europeans wage war much more brutally than everyone else does. And this, a lot of Europeans would not like the term I'm about to use, but there's a lot of savagery in European warfare. We always have said that the Zulu and the Aztecs and the Lakota and the Japanese...
Savage is another one of those relative freedom fighter type terms, right?
Yeah, that they're savages, but Europeans have just outright slaughtered each other for hundreds of years, and we're just okay with it. Right. We had to force them to be nice to each other. We tacked a single currency onto them and said, "Shut up, stop fighting." And that's how the EU is. And they can't even keep that together.
Right.
European nationalism is just too strong to reason. And I think what we've noticed in comparison to European violence is humans don't actually really like to fight all that much. It's actually not good. Violence is traumatic. It's deeply traumatic. It's very hard to kill someone. It's extremely hard, and it destroys your brain.
Especially in close contact, you know,
Yeah,
not
and
to
I
mention
mean,
the drone strikes today. That's easier
yeah,
for
with the
people.
drone
But
strikes, or a handgun. I mean, shooting someone. You know, we always talk about self-defense in the street, and people are like, oh, grab a knife. But I'm like, no, don't get a knife. A knife is more fearsome because that shows that you intend to stab someone multiple times.
it is more savage.
It's more savage and intimate way of killing someone. A gun, you just pop, gone, fight's over.
Yep.
With a knife or a blade or a fist, or not fist, a steel, a brass knuckle. There we go. You know, you have to pummel somebody, and that sucks. And you have to just get in this mindset that you're okay with that, and then you have to drop the mindset that you're okay with that, and you're traumatized by it. Violence is never healthy for the human mind, and it just isn't. We have documents of even spanking a child is unhealthy for the parents' mind and for the child's mind. You know, we have research to show that violence is just not good for our mentalities. And so these societies, in comparison to Europe, the Aztecs, you know, world renowned for their human sacrifice. You know, ignoring that,
yes.
The Aztecs actually never really went to war with people, or at least they tried not to. They did these rituals called, I don't really know the name, but they're essentially just ritual combat, where the best warriors would be handpicked from each tribe, and they'd face off, usually no casualties. Sometimes the terms were death, but not always. And if they lost, the other tribe would submit. Full, like, economic rights, cultural rights, political rights, everything would submit to the Aztecs.
I think that'd be a way better system than mass conscription, forcing people to go fight these wars that politicians. I'm a big advocate of, if a president wants to declare war, I think that we should go back a little bit to the Enlightenment and make them go, or not even the Enlightenment, ancient times, even go back and lead the troops. How about that? I guarantee you, if that was the case, if Donald Trump, Barack Obama, who was it before that, Bill Clinton, whoever had to declare war, and they had to go fight with the troops, I guarantee you they'd all be singing Kumbaya.
Oh, you know? Yeah, they would. If war was not in their interests in a way that didn't damage them, they would, you know, they would never, we wouldn't have these problems. We wouldn't have generations of homeless and damaged vets. That wouldn't be an issue. Anyways, to answer your second question, because I think I provided a pretty solid example of that.
Great answer. Yeah, this is fun. I like it. I like just the kind of open discussion, some guiding questions. This is good. The problem is I keep thinking of more things I want to ask you as you're talking, but I'm like, I gotta just reel it in. I'm just typing them out and saving them for later.
That's good. I'm excited. I'm glad you're enjoying it. I am as well. It's very gratifying. Now, the United States is the first ever like singular world power. If there is,
what do you mean by that?
So after the fall of the Soviet Union, and before the rise of China, the United States was essentially the most powerful nation on the planet, and nowhere in the world could you escape the United States' influence anywhere. You don't need to completely dominate the world with your borders to be the most powerful nation. You know, there's this constant, like, what if Germany conquered the world in World War II? No, that's not how it works. You can't single-handedly Roman Empire the planet.
It just doesn't work.
You would have to
too much to try to control.
Yeah, you would have to kill most of the population of the world in order to effectively rule them. Most people like being ruled by the people who live near them, which is, you know, sensible.
Very.
That's why colonialism collapsed so rapidly, because people were like, why are these random British guys, you know, running these coal mines where my son dies? Like, that's just a pretty, you know, people make those leaps pretty easily based on the irrationality of it. And what the United States has done is it has garnered, whether willingly or unwillingly, the consent of most of the planet for its corporations to operate wherever it wants to. Now, people will say, well, that's not really power. The United States government doesn't control everybody. I don't think people will quite understand how the United States works. Corporations are what keep this government afloat. I mean, not even just from a bribing politicians aspect. Corporations are the epitome of capitalism. Their most powerful form of capitalist accumulation. And when the government acts in its interest, it's also considering the health of the economy, and the health of the economy is governed by the health of the corporations. And the fact that we just have access to cobalt and diamond mines in the Congo, we trade with a producer nation in China. We blew up Japan and have kept it our essential, Pacific vassal state for 80 years. We haven't allowed the Koreas to reunify. We destroyed the Soviet Union, our number one rival ever. We have effectively made the most powerful empire previous to us our lapdog in the United Kingdom.
Absolutely.
I mean, I can't
Look at
imagine
World War One and Two.
Yeah, the British monarchy might have been mad at first, but then they were like, oh, these guys are actually better at killing people than us. No,
Yeah,
I'm serious. I think the British are impressed with how good we are at governing the world. We're better. In fact, there are way less rebellions against us. The British had the Sepoys and the Zulu and the Chinese, and we have done an amazing job at spreading capitalism across the globe. The British can't even dream of being like us.
And not to mention, the British are, I don't know how many miles across the British Channel, but they're much closer to all the action. They're much closer. Theoretically, it should have been easier for the British to control Europe, because Europe's connected to Asia and whatever. Damn near connected to Africa. It might be actually connected. I don't know if it's connected or just close, but it's weird that we're so far away, yet we're able to have the greatest empire the world has ever seen.
One of the things that comes with, in my opinion, that comes with being a great empire is an effective communication system, a speedy one at that.
Yep.
The Mongols had such a large empire because they just had extremely fast postmen, crazy fast. I mean, look up the record times of these guys.
When you say postman, I don't know that term. Is that someone who is delivering messages, basically?
Yes, messenger.
Okay.
Messenger.
Gotcha.
I
Paul Revere.
Messengers.
Just kidding.
Yeah, Paul Revere.
Yeah.
And a state's ability to govern a large amount of area is based entirely on what I would call control of information.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the United States, and this might be a controversial opinion for someone that's listening. The United States has one of the most significant grasps of control I've probably ever studied in my life. I've studied many empires, and as much as you want to talk about, the Soviet Union censoring musicians, or Nazi Germany, just constantly being Nazis, or, Franco's control over the media in Spain, the United States has one of the most elaborate and complex media networks that, I think the world has ever seen, ever. The Romans had coins and roads and postage, and the United States has radio, and it has television, and it has internet. The United States refused to build the internet for the rest of the world unless it was the domain of the internet. The World Wide Web is based entirely in our nation, and we refuse to spread it across the planet unless everyone accepted that.
Right.
That was our terms of agreement, and that's why Russia wants to build its own internet, because it doesn't think that its citizens can safely browse the internet without U.S. intelligence spying on it. And we have proof of U.S. intelligence spying on places like New Zealand, which is a harmless country full of farmers and ranchers and social democrats. They're not going to go destroying the Pacific Ocean in a campaign of brutality. And I think that this sort of power has come from all these massive conglomerates and technology. We have somehow, the United States has been the proprietor of all this technology. And of course we had Tesla and Edison and, Bell and all these other great minds who just had some money lying around and messed around with some tinkering, and all of a sudden, bam, they have these inventions. And I think that's primarily what led to the United States' dominance. It's our music too. We enslaved Black people, freed them, I would say free in quotes, because sharecroppers were certainly not free people. We used music to spread our culture. And American music is great. We have country, we have blues, we have rock and roll, we have our own forms of
Blue jeans.
Yeah, we have blue jeans. We have hot rods. We have hot cars. We have muscle cars. We have, American culture is amazing. I love hamburgers. I love baseball. There are so many things I love about the United States' culture. I have a very soft heart for this place, which is why I want to fight so hard for it. And that's what we've done. We've sold ourselves to the world, and when people didn't buy us, we pointed a gun at them and said, "Buy it." And that's
big stick, right?
Yeah, that was Teddy Roosevelt was one of the biggest presidents when it came to supporting direct imperialism and colonialism. He
loved it. He was a warmonger. He loved it.
That quote. People take that quote and they think that's how they should govern their personal lives. That quote was not about governing your personal life.
Which quote are you referring to?
The speak softly and carry a big stick. Yeah. That quote was entirely about international diplomacy.
Oh, it was big stick policy.
Yeah, it was. It's like what the British did in China. They're like, maybe you should trade with us. And the Chinese were like, no, you're foreigners. Why would we do that? And then they were like, oh, yes, boats time. They blew multiple Chinese ports up and got like 8 other countries involved, and China was destroyed. And that's the speak softly, carry big stick doctrine just put into practice. And Teddy Roosevelt saw that and was like, oh, genius. And then they destroyed the Philippines. And that's kind of where the U.S. has kind of built its consensus is, please accept our goods. You have no choice. And that's simply how we did it.
All right, Boston, I think you answered that question very well.
Thank you.
I think you touched on a lot of super important points about that. I'm very satisfied with that answer.
Glad I could help.
So now I am going to, the best you can, try to answer concisely. But
yes.
Obviously, if you have a lot to say, please just say it. Free talk, whatever you want to say. But I'm just trying to find okay, here's one. What is a common misconception about leftism that people regularly discuss that you would like to address? Or as in what we were talking about earlier, people refer to AOC, Bernie Sanders as leftist, as communist. The left is rising, a socialist revolution, whatever Donald Trump says, which isn't happening, obviously. But so what is a common misconception about leftism that you think that people just don't understand that you would like? What's one big one that you would like to touch on?
There are so many.
I know. It's a tough question.
There's the Marxist professors one. There are hardly any of those.
And I tell people that all the time. They're like, oh, you're probably a communist when you went to college. Like, most of them really put down communism pretty strongly. Pretty strong. Like, I would say they're more coastal liberal elites, if anything. But
yeah, they're I don't want to be too rude, but they're kind of snobbish, and they
absolutely
mock protest groups and revolutionary groups. Very
absolutely.
There's a lot of racism and sexism in academia still. Like women still can't get by. Well, anyways, getting off topic. There's the Marxist professor one. There's leftists being violent. There's I need to pick one because I need to answer. I think I will go with. I think I'm going to go with that. Not all leftists particularly want to recreate the Soviet Union, because there's this big big thing that we struggle with. We bring up socialism or communism, right? And everyone just assumes that we want to kill everybody.
Yeah.
And I hate violence. I despise it with all of my being. I had a violent childhood. I had a violent, school career. I got into a lot of trouble with violence. I used it as a tool quite a bit, and I was always upset by it. And any, leftist who says they like violence is talking out of their behind, or they just don't really understand Marxism, because we don't want
out of their ass.
Yeah. We've never desired a war with anybody. We have just had to fight. We are immediately painted as these, religious, anti-religious, devils that want to eat your babies and, take away your toothbrush. And that was never our intention in the first place. And people say things like the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I think that's a disgusting quote. That's people just have bad intentions, or have good intentions and they fail. That's not exactly, people don't just go, oh, I'm good, and they kill everybody. That's not quite how it works. But I wanted to point out to everyone who's listening or who will listen that there are some very terrible things that have occurred across the planet, across time, under every system, right? There are mass famines under capitalism. There are mass famines under feudalism. There are mass famines in Rome. We've just struggled to feed people. Humanity generally sucks at food production.
Which is funny because that's, something everybody needs to survive.
and we just don't quite understand how to do it super well. And we're getting to the point where we can.
Okay.
The thing is when things happen under a system, we have a lot of explanations for it. There's new evidence that the potato famine in Ireland was actually engineered by the British Empire on purpose. It wasn't just
wouldn't surprise me.
It wasn't just a bacteria or a virus or whatever. It legitimately, they believe legitimately, Irish historians believe now that the British conspired to genocide the Irish completely, and they failed. They failed miserably. The Irish are now, the Irish are now on their way to getting a full republic soon, for crying out loud. The English.
It's about time.
Yeah, right. I know. And the way that people treat things that happen under socialist and communist governments is just so strange to me, because we have never ever gone to like early colonial America where colonists were eating each other because they just didn't know how to grow food, and then they ended up relying on natives that they ended up killing anyways to figure out how to grow food. And we never were like, oh man, maybe early capitalism or maybe colonialism is a terrible thing. We have just kind of gone, oh, that was the symptoms of the colony at the time, and we don't really question it. We don't talk about
the Native Americans would have done it to us if they had better technology.
Yeah, people assume that everyone is out to get them, and that's just simply not true. The Native Americans, they were intelligent. They had many ways of understanding things. They did not want to conquer things.
Well, now hold on though. Now, isn't it true though that most Native American tribes though were competing with each other, and they were not friendly with each other?
Yeah, no, it's true. Here's the thing. I'm coming back. I'm circling back to like the European violence kind of thing.
Oh, gotcha.
I'm going to do that.
Yeah, carry on.
The way that Europeans waged war, again, is extremely brutal. And Europeans come to another continent, right? They have no idea what these people are like. Not even a clue. We don't even know how to speak to them in a way that makes sense. But we have learned over time that Native Americans oftentimes did not kill each other. They kidnapped each other. It was much more profitable for the tribe, of any tribe, to kidnap their wife, kidnap their horse, kidnap them, and make them work for the tribe that captured them. Because it just makes more sense to keep people alive that way. And on the plains, when you consider how scarce the resources are in a place like eastern Montana, where it's literally just grass and water, well, we used to have the buffalo until we killed all 20 million of them in 1876. But you have to consider that like most of the time humans don't want to kill each other, and in Native American societies, war was often there's a popular concept, counting coup. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
I've not, no.
So there's a war game that many plains tribes, I don't know about North Atlantic tribes and southeastern tribes like the Seminoles and the Wampanoag and stuff, but I know about in Montana and North Dakota, places that I grew up in, that they have this game called Counting Coup, and the best warriors in nomadic societies in the U.S. plains were people who tapped their enemies with a stick and survived the encounter. And every time they did
what do you mean survive the encounter?
Don't get captured or killed.
Okay, gotcha.
You have to be able to get into the battle, tap, because it tap the person with the stick, and then get back to your army, and then be like, who was my witness? Who saw me like pester this guy with my stick? And when you did that,
was it a big stick though?
It was it was a sizable.
I'm just kidding.
I imagine you get more benefit from a longer stick because then you have more time to run away.
Probably.
You can do a little poke and then sprint. If you have a small stick, you have to get real nice and close, jab them with it, and then run like hell. And that's how a lot of those like that's how warriors got feathers. Is they every time they counted coup, they got a feather. And
every time they did what though?
Counted coup, they did the stick thing.
So they tapped someone with the stick and they had a witness and returned back to their home tribe without being captured or killed.
Yes.
So they got a feather in their cap.
Yes, and that made you a more prestigious warrior because it wasn't that you killed a bunch of people or that you won a battle, it's that you horrifically insulted an enemy in the middle of combat.
And you were elusive enough to make it back home.
Mm-hmm. Whereas in Europe, you have people with massive fire sticks just blasting each other to death, and we were so used to that kind of violence that when we came to North America, we just assumed that everyone else killed each other. We were like, this must be the normal state of affairs.
Right. There was no North Americans coming over here, Christopher Columbus wanting to play the counting coup game, right?
Yeah, no. He played the counting smallpox game is what he did. He gave people things that were not great for them. And at the time, there's a debate on whether or not we understood if smallpox could be spread through blankets. I don't want to get into that. It's a rocky road.
Very.
But
well, what do you think overall? Just like one word, do you think that?
I think we knew. Easy.
I tend to believe that as well. Yeah. But I have no evidence of that. I haven't looked into it at all. But I just, from what I know, I think I do. But anyway, keep going.
I think I kind of lost track of the original question, but I'm going to keep going.
We were talking about the common misconceptions, and you were talking about common misconceptions people have associated with communism. You were referencing USSR and how
we're really going places.
Yeah. What was that?
I said we're really going places here.
Yeah, we're all over the board. We're talking Native Americans. We're talking Christopher Columbus. We're talking big stick policy. We're hitting it all. It's fun. This is what we're doing about it. Yeah.
I enjoy this a lot. Anyways, to kind of circle back to the question, that's what I'm saying is with instances like this, we have suffering. I mean, suffering isn't just communism. Suffering isn't just capitalism. Humans just suffer. Our entire goal for society is that we suffer less. Every time we have created...
When you say we, are you saying communists or are you saying humans in general?
Collectively.
Okay, gotcha.
Communists, of course, argue that we do this the best. Evidence-wise, that remains to be the truest possible thing. Evidence-wise, we have succeeded in some areas and failed in others. And I would happily admit that to anyone I talk to about, socialism and communism. We have failed in many aspects and succeeded greatly in a lot of others. We were the fastest in space flight, easy. The U.S. went to the moon, but we went everywhere else. I think one of the things that I want to emphasize is the way we criticize communism isn't typical of the way we criticize every other nation or ideology on Earth. When we think of industrialization and cholera and the fact that the water was polluted in London and it required liberalism to save them from complete and total just environmental destruction, we don't go, that was just a consequence of capitalism. We say industrialization. We never say capitalism, right? We always use fancier terms that take meaning away from
marketing.
Yeah, and industrialization is an aspect of capitalism. I mean, your entire economy is to produce goods, right? The whole point of capitalism is profit. So you want to produce more, and so you industrialize to produce more. And all these aspects of industrialization that are terrible, like child labor, imperialism, disease, environmental destruction. These are aspects of capitalism that we just don't really consider are a problem. We don't consider that many criminals make money because it's another form of capitalism. It's a little bit more crude to be a criminal that makes money.
It's not state sanctioned though.
Yes,
that's the problem.
Yeah, it's not state sanctioned capitalism. People grow up into an economy that doesn't let them in, and so they're like, well, I'll just form my own economy, and that's when you become a criminal. You become
which is actually a very free market idea, right?
Yes. You could potentially argue, if you want to be edgy about it, you could potentially argue that criminals are the most free market aspect of capitalism.
Oh yeah, that's not a bad take. I mean, it's really not.
If you look on this like Homeland Security website, I don't know why I did this. I just found this one day. The DHS doesn't know how to prosecute international criminal organizations. They're so hard to find. And it's because their market is so fluid. They move so quickly. They're guided entirely by underhanded commerce. It's impressive. States that were meant to support capitalism have failed to effectively stop other capitalist enterprises. And now let me, go back to my original point. That's what I'm saying is we're not nearly as critical of all the other systems we've ever governed under as we are of communism. And I mean, even fascism gets a better light than communism does. And fascism deliberately wants to destroy everything.
Well, I think my take on it is, and again, I am not a leftist. I'm not a communist. I'm looking into it. I'm interested in it. It interests me. But to me, it feels like, to answer your question about or not your question, but your statement about how it is deemed more evil than fascism, is because I think that it is so easy to turn away fascism. It is so easy to say, no, I'm not a Nazi. Like, I don't like that. I don't like fascist ideas. It's so easy to say that. But communism and leftism makes you think more. And I think, if nothing else, it opens people's minds and horizons into what is going on in this world, whether you agree with it or not. It makes you question things more, question the inherent systems, the inherent establishments that are in our society. And I think that's why propaganda, whatever you want to call it, the state is constantly using it as a negative term, communism, and constantly trying, because I think communism and leftist ideals are much more, because I like to think of human progression as we are moving left. I think eventually we will become ready for a communist society. Eventually. I don't think right now. But I think that this shows that, like, where fascism is more backwards, so leftism is more forward. And I think the state recognizes that. And the United States, for example, wants to turn that down, because states are all about maintaining the status quo. Look at any empire in history. They want to maintain the status quo. They don't want to lose power. The United States does not want to lose power to a communist or leftist or anarchist insurgents, because revolutions are very bad for states. Revolutions are very bad. And I mean, often they're suppressed, but sometimes they're not. And I think that's why people, and if you look at the USSR, for example, I mean, we almost destroyed our world in that Cold War multiple times. There were many nuclear close misses, or whatever you want to call it. And I think that is still ingrained in U.S. society so deeply that the people running our country do not want this Cold War. I don't think the Cold War really has ended, but I don't think they want this to. I think they see communism and leftism as a large threat, and I think that's why that's why I think that communism is almost seen worse than fascism today. But yeah, anyway.
No, I agree. There's a very common quote among left-wing people that we call it's, here it is. I'll present the quote to you without context, bare naked. Fascism is capitalism in decay. That's a very common quote in left-wing circles. And the justification for that kind of quote is oftentimes capitalist nations that are struggling can't seem to stop socialist parties from forming. I mean, look at Weimar Germany. You had Rosa Luxemburg, you had Edward Bernstein. They formed the Spartacist League or Spartacist League or however you want to say it. They revolted in 1919, tried to take over Germany with a socialist party.
Right.
Communist
right
party,
after World War One.
Right after World War One, literally right afterwards. They failed. Luxemburg and Bernstein, I'm pretty sure, were executed. What happened was the liberal government at the time didn't have an army because, World War One, they were like, no, you guys can't have an army. They hired right-wing militias to fight for them. They were called the Freikorps. Veterans of World War One that were bitter at the French and British for kicking their butts. And they basically, and these were social democrats that ran Germany at the time, like Bernie Sanders types. And they hired right-wing militias. So Bernie Sanders of Germany hired like the Proud Boys, essentially, to beat up these communists in a revolution, and they succeeded. And then, Hitler comes along and he's like, oh, these communists are going to take everything away from you. They're going to destroy this. They're going to destroy that. And the Jews and black people. And, he's created all these targets that were enemies of the state and of the German people. And he took over. And for the most part, corporations were not affected. Corporations were like, cool, great. Now we can go back to producing things instead of fighting strikes all the time. Because so many strikes happen. And people there's a huge, this is another misnomer that really gets under my skin, that Nazis and communists are the same.
Real quick before you keep going, that is so funny that you just said that, because I was just about to interrupt you and be like, I want to get to this. I want to talk about keep going. Continue what you're talking about.
And I mean this with all due respect to anyone who believes this. It's complete bullshit.
Oh, absolutely.
I have tried my best to understand the logic of saying that kind of thing, and I don't get it.
Doesn't make sense.
Open Mein Kampf, the Communist Manifesto, read them side by side, and you will know exactly what I'm talking about.
Didn't Adolf Hitler, choose the color red for the Nazi party to piss off communists?
Yes. One of the most impressive things about fascist leaders, and I mean impressive in a rivalry way. I'm not impressed by fascists. They're disgusting. Yep. Is that they're so good at lying to people.
They are
so good at it. All they do is lie about everything.
They do.
And Hitler was just this master deceiver in a way that disgusts me, because I can't even believe this guy went to sleep at night and was like, I did it. I'm pretty sure he didn't. He was on cocaine like every day. Or like methamphetamines or something.
Well, he gave it to his troops too.
Yeah, and he gave it to his soldiers. I mean, I'm not surprised he didn't drug Ava Braun at some point. I'm sure he did.
I'm sure he did.
Yeah. They've never been interested.
Real quick, Ava Braun was his wife. Just so for anybody listening, that was his wife. So
that was his wife. Ava Braun was his wife. Mussolini became a fascist because he got mad that no one listened to him in the Communist Party.
Because he was originally a leftist, correct?
He was a leftist. There were a ton of leftists in Italy. I mean, especially Antonio Gramsci, one of my just favorite authors of all time.
What was the big revolutionary leftist party that was responsible for a lot of assassinations in Italy? There was one.
There's one called the PCI, which is the Partito Comunista Italia.
I think that's the one I'm thinking of. Yep.
Yeah, that was just the one that was just generally, it was a pro USSR Marxist Leninist party in Italy. And it was huge. I mean, everyone talks about fascism in Italy. The PCI was massive in Italy, had so much power, and Mussolini wasn't even that popular when he marched on Rome anyways. I was talking to an Italian historian the other day, and most people hated Mussolini the moment he came in. They were like, this guy's this guy's a douchebag.
He was a wannabe Hitler.
Yeah, he was just bald, uncharismatic Hitler, and he was
that's a good way of describing Mussolini.
He wore a funny hat and had some pretty cool coats, but that was about his only. And no one was even interested in fighting in Ethiopia. People were like, "Why would we go there?" And Mussolini was just upset and insecure that he didn't have a piece of Africa. That's really all that really was.
Dylan,
I can't hear you anymore.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, cool. Sorry about that, everyone. Everyone, it's gonna be like 3 people listening. So real quickly, there's a couple things I really want to get to tonight because
Yes.
I'm getting tired, but
Oh yeah, we're getting close to 11. I am
yeah,
also feeling the
it's
fatigue.
it's not even 10 yet here. It's a little bit earlier, but
Yeah,
okay.
understandable.
So do you feel comfortable describing the difference between Marxism and Leninism, anarchism and Maoism in a short amount of time? Or is that
Yeah.
something that you want more time to get through?
No, I can easily describe the differences.
Let's hear it.
So Marxism, Leninism, anarchism, Maoism, correct? These 4?
Marxism, Leninism, anarchism, and Maoism, yes.
Okay, sweet. So Marxism, I would jokingly say Marxism is if you just read Marx and that was it, which you shouldn't do. You should read more. But Marxism is the understanding that the working class is the most powerful force in human history, and that the working class has always been present in revolutions, even if they weren't led by like workers. Workers were the fighters. It wasn't rich dudes who fought the American Revolution. It was farmers. They were the workers. And that eventually we'll get to a society that is able to effectively feed and clothe all people and take care of them.
And that's Marxism.
That's just base general Marxism, is that we the people are the strongest force in history. We move history forward, and we have gone through multiple systems that make us stronger over time. We were weaker under feudalism, stronger under capitalism, we'll be even stronger under socialism.
Okay, so he's referring specifically to workers, correct?
Yes.
And not peasants. I'm sure you'll get into that, but
yeah, I'll get in peasants when it comes to Maoism. And workers at the time just meant industrial workers, but it means anybody now.
okay.
Leninism. So this is where I come in. This is my ideology. I didn't stop reading after Lenin. I've read Mao. I've read Black Panther leaders and stuff, but I like Leninism the most. It seems to appeal the best to my mindset. And Leninism is essentially a more advanced building of Marxism. Marxism is a lot of optimism and a lot of hope, and assuming that the working class will just like spontaneously rise up, because of how upset it is. Leninism essentially says that we have to work for a revolution. We have to go out there and we have to agitate for it. There's a common leftist slogan. It's agitate, educate, organize. That's the 3 words.
And just for people listening, agitation is the practice of almost propaganda, but basically allowing people to see what is going on, right?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you have a better definition for agitation. But.
Well, no, it's actually really succinct. That's actually better than what I was going to say. That's great. Thank you for that. And now I have a new definition to use.
Awesome.
Agitation is essentially allowing people to see what capitalism is it's hidden them from. It's hard to be upset at the world when you're stuffing your face full of McDonald's, because McDonald's.
So it's kind of like the Matrix thing.
Yeah, it's kind of a red pill, blue pill situation. Right. And Leninism, of course, believes that capitalism is very good at keeping itself afloat. Lenin wrote this, 60 years after Marx, started writing, and so socialist movements failed a lot. And Lenin was like, why, if we're so inevitably going to be in control of the world?
Just clarify, you're now getting into the difference between Marxism and Leninism.
Yes.
Correct? Okay, perfect.
Yes, we are. We're getting into the differences. And Leninism was like, why are we failing? Like, I thought we were the inevitable workers' revolution that took over the world. And Lenin just studied day and night and was like, what the hell is going on here? Well, he realized that the workers aren't organized. They're powerful. There's many of them, but they have no idea what they're doing. Right. And there needs to be more sophisticated methods of governance and organization and military recruitment and so on and so forth. And Lenin also identifies like imperialism and identifies the machines in capitalism that attacks forces against capitalism, whether it's Islamic reactionaries, socialists, fascists, etc. Whenever fascists do, debate with capitalists. And Leninism basically just advocates for a more advanced form of Marxism that supports the idea that workers should take over the state and use it to defeat capitalism. And then,
So, from what you're describing, it sounds like Leninism is a more well-defined ideology, a
Oh, yes.
more practical ideology for actually
yes.
revolution, see USSR.
Yeah, Lenin thought that Marx didn't write enough. Marx wrote a lot about what he thought.
Well, yeah, because I took a political theory class with a Ramona Gray at the University of Montana, and she discusses this. She says, well, Marx didn't really give a good blueprint for how to make this society come about.
He wrote all these grand concepts, and then people were like, well, how do you do it? And he was like, boom, I'm dead.
Oh, no.
So he was alive, didn't really give an option, and then he died. And so everyone was like, what now? And Lenin was the guy that was like, let's offer a solution. And it's basically just a better way of organizing a Marxist revolution is what Lenin does. He basically gives us the toolbox. And, people give Lenin crap for being hard to read, but Alabama sharecroppers in 1936 could read Lenin, so I don't really understand
It's a cop out.
Yeah, it's like an illiterate black man in Alabama in 1936 had a shotgun and a copy of State Revolution, and he said, "This is how we get things done. Put them on the table."
Right.
And it's that simple. Now Maoism. I'm going to skip to Maoism. I'm going to do anarchism last because it's the most different of these four.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maoism is, people jokingly say it's like Marxism, but not for white people. It's very funny. But Maoism is used all over the world. In fact, Maoist movements are currently the only existing Marxist revolutions right now. There's Maoists in Philippines. There's Maoists in India. There's Maoists in Nepal.
Now, real quick, do they still use the term Maoism generally?
Well, when leftists are talking amongst each other, they use these like colloquial theoretical terms. If I were to talk to the average Joe in public, I would not be like, oh, Maoist, Leninist, yada yada, because no one knows any of that. That's not something people aren't told to study Marxist theory, because that would, break the whole reason not to read it.
Those people taking the red pill, at least thinking about what is wrong with their country. Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, at least thinking a little more critically than the U.S. government wants them to.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And Maoism in particular was a response primarily to colonialism, and what's considered China's position. China from 1836 to 1936, they call that period the century of humiliation.
Okay.
That period right there. Weirdly
is
enough,
that real quick? Is that kind of the same period as like the warlord period, or what people call, or is that before that? Don't elaborate on it. Just sorry.
a portion of it is the warlord period.
Okay, so, gotcha. Keep going. Sorry about that. Yeah.
No, it's okay. No, it's great. I would love to elaborate on details for you. It's helpful. It helps you imagine my argument when I'm saying better.
Absolutely.
And what happened is foreigners humiliated China. For one moment, foreigners did ruin something across the planet, and the Chinese were upset. And they had multiple revolutions to try and figure this out. They had the Xinhai Revolution. They had, the Republican Revolution. They tried to do democracy. It didn't really work out. They tried to bring back the emperor. It didn't work out.
What was the name when the communists and Mao were fighting the nationalists? Who it was like the person that the U.S. was most friendly with. What was his name?
It's not going to be spelled the way I'm going to say it. I learned how to say it from a Chinese friend of mine because I wanted to know. Yeah. His name is Cheng Jieshi.
Okay.
This is Chinese, is like legitimate.
What is the Americanized way of saying it?
I would say Chiang Kai-shek.
Yep. Okay. That's what I was thinking of. All right. Keep going. Keep going.
Close at all, but I said that and they all laughed at me. They were like, who? Right. And I was like, yeah.
You fucking idiot.
Yeah, they were like, you don't know Chinese, you dumbass. And I was like, I know I don't. I really should learn it. It's a wonderful language. Maoists were like in the countryside. They lived in the countryside. They supported the peasants in the countryside. because the peasants were the ones who felt it the worst in Chinese society. China didn't have an industrial working class. It just didn't.
Right.
They didn't even have indoor plumbing in a lot of places. I can't even imagine having a working class without even that. And they essentially organized on the principles that we should fight back against the invaders, defeat them, and then begin mass industrialization of society. And they used different methods than the Bolsheviks did. They didn't believe in dictatorship of the proletariat, which is the idea that the party should guide the working class. What the Maoists believe.
While you're on that topic real quick, that was one of the questions I want to get to.
Yeah.
Will you, as you're discussing, better define the dictatorship of the proletariat? Because that is a horrible name. It's a horrible name.
It's bad. It's a very bad name. We talk about it all the time. What that term is supposed to mean is that the bourgeois...
Majority rule, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The rich have always had a dictatorship. Capitalism is a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. It's a dictatorship of the rich. The rich have absolute power. What the I'm going to abbreviate, what the DOTP, dictatorship of the proletariat, means is that the working class has the absolute power in society. That's what it is, that society is dictated entirely by our demands, not the demands of rich people. That's what that means. It's not aged well at all. It's
not at all
aged well at all. At first, it made a lot of sense to people back in the 1800s and the early 1900s. Now it has aged like a shitty wine.
That little term, dictatorship, is very easy to attack and put down, right? I mean, you hear the term dictatorship, no matter what it is, people don't look that far into it. They're like, dictatorship, bad.
Yeah, you see dictate. I mean, and anyone should have that sort of natural compulsion, because dictators are starting good. You know, they're not great people. And with Maoism in particular, they did this thing called the mass line. And I'm not going to get too deep into that just for sake of convenience. But Maoists believe that the party should be made up entirely of the people. The Bolsheviks trained themselves for years and formed what is called a cadre of people who knew exactly what they were talking about, and they had worked together for many years. Maoists believe that kind of forms a clique, and that doesn't effectively govern the proletariat well, and that you should have a party composed entirely of the people and not of Bolsheviks who had trained as scholars their whole lives, because then there's no academic elitism there. There's no and arguably they were correct. I mean, as a person who subscribes to Leninism, there is a problem with the way Lenin approaches some of the ideological training of the Bolsheviks. They did become an elitist party eventually.
So have you heard of the law of oligarchy, the iron law of oligarchy?
Are you talking about that's the Aristotle concept, right?
Basically, it's similar to that, as in, what would you call it? A democracy, the perverse form is an oligarchy, or I might be messing this up, but it's basically the idea that no matter how democratic or how free a group starts. I was listening to a podcast, Dangerous History podcast, talking about the political parties in the United States, and especially the six-party system, and how it discusses how no matter how democratic it is, eventually that these groups bow down to the people with the money, bow down to the elites. So would you say that's kind of the same train of thought, the same idea you're talking about with like the dictatorship of the proletariat, how eventually it will lead to the elites controlling it? And no matter how democratic and revolutionary it is, the iron law of oligarchy may say that it will result in the elites. And this is where you could argue that Stalin comes in, takes control of the USSR, makes it a dictatorship.
It's complicated.
Yeah. And if it's too much for right now, we can hold that off till later, because that's the question I had. So
I'll give a short answer as best as I can.
Yeah,
Russia has a particularly unique history when it comes to governments. Russia has always, and I don't mean to say this culturally, I don't think Russians are just dictators. That's not fair to say of any culture. But Russia is a very large place. And
Yeah.
extremely large. Like, we in the United States are grateful and very proud of our size, but we have no idea. We have no idea. We are not the
Because
largest.
well, Russia's probably got to be twice as big at least, right?
At least, yeah. I'm pretty sure China, India, and Russia are bigger. I think they are, at least, if not in size and population. For the
I've
two.
seen China being pretty comparable to the U.S. in
Yeah.
size, but yeah.
And Russia has always kind of favored a much less democratic approach simply because it's so huge.
Well, and also, could that have to do with them jumping from having a czar straight to the USSR, right? I mean,
Well, they tried democracy after the first October Revolution, or not October,
in
February.
1905, correct?
There was the 1905 Bloody Sunday massacre and the revolt, where they overthrew the czar. The czar managed to stay in power somehow. I can't.
What did he make? The Duma after the
He
1905?
made the Duma, and everyone was like, "Oh, okay, we'll take the parliament. We'll try it out. We'll see how it goes."
Right.
Doesn't work. You know, the czar just doesn't listen to anybody. The Duma is a rubber stamp committee, is what it is. Well, in 1917, in February, there's the February Revolution, and a man by the name of Alexander Kerensky comes into power, and he's a Bernie Sanders type. He's a
reformist.
He's a reformist. He's a social democrat, a democratic socialist, however you want to phrase it. He likes capitalism. He just wants to do a few like token reforms, make some better healthcare, make the state a bit bigger, whatever. He doesn't succeed at all. In fact, he betrayed a lot of the demands of the people. He stays in World War I, which is the biggest.
Yeah, wasn't that the biggest thing for the socialist revolution? They're like, dude, no war. What is it? No war, bread.
Peace, land, and bread.
What is it?
Peace, land, and bread. That's Lenin's slogan. It's peace, land, and bread. Kerensky wanted to stay in the war to fight for the success of liberal capitalism. Kerensky liked Woodrow Wilson and was like, yeah, we should defeat the Germans and we should build a new Europe. Unfortunately, you know, people who have nothing involved with the government of Russia were like, no, this is stupid. I just want my food and my children back. And they were just upset at Kerensky. And the Bolsheviks went from a party of like 300 people to a party of like 300,000 in 4 months. That's how much they hated Kerensky. Like, the Bolsheviks were a nothing group in 1917. And then all of a sudden they were the biggest political party in Russia because people were just so mad at Kerensky. And then they overthrew everyone.
I know I've kind of derailed us a little bit, but can you also real quickly define the difference with, so I think we have Maoism pretty much covered. I'm going to try to sum it up from what you said.
Yeah.
Tell me if I'm wrong, please.
Go ahead.
So Maoism is more, trying to think of a word for it, more, to me, it sounds like it's more egalitarian, more for all people to revolt compared to Leninism and Marxism, which specifically focuses on the workers. And when I'm talking about the workers, there's a distinguishment between workers and peasants in the world. And so would you say that's accurate, that Maoism more encourages all people to revolt, to try to reach this communist society? Please explain. Actually, we're just going to move on from anarchism right now, I think, would be the best. Right. We can talk about that another time.
Yeah. They might not like that, you know, if they'll be like, of course he skipped anarchism because they.
All right. You know what, Boston?
I'm kidding.
You give me, no, I'm serious. No, that's a good point, actually. It's a joke. That's a good point. Why don't you, could you please elaborate a little bit on how anarchism is different than, just for everybody listening, Marxism, Leninism, Maoism?
Yes. So anarchism is actually I work with a lot of anarchists in my free time. I run an organization. I told you about it, kind of. And
I'm going to get to that at the end, too. I want to hear about that. So keep going.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And anarchists are, I would say, one of the more unique groups of leftists ever. They're very eccentric and fun and kind people, but their ideology is very strange. And anarchists come out of this trend in socialist theory that is wary of state authority. So the state didn't exist before the 1600s. The state wasn't a thing. You had
Right,
dynasty.
the rise of the nation state and all
Yes.
that. Yeah.
Well, if the state is a natural consequence of capitalism, then obviously the state shouldn't exist ever if you were to abolish capitalism, is what anarchists conclude, right? Because Marxists say, oh, Marx himself said that the state is the development of capitalism. You know, people say that it's the government versus the private, citizen, but that's not true. The government is lifted up by the market, if anything. And what ends up happening with anarchists is they see Marx's writings about the state being a product of capitalism and go, oh, so that means the state is just evil. It's a bad institution. It needs to be overthrown. It needs to be abolished. You'll hear many anarchists say things like abolish the state. That's their big slogan. Or
I'm a big fan of that idea. Yeah.
Yeah, it's and at first if you're a libertarian, you're like, yeah, I like these guys, and then
that's kind of where I am at my current political stage. I'm more leaning libertarianism, so that's why I like the idea of anarchism.
Anarchists will dub themselves libertarian socialists, and in defense of that term, libertarian socialist was originally the first way it was used. Libertarianism as a right-wing American movement didn't exist when libertarianism as a word was invented. Libertarianism was originally left-wing. And a lot of libertarian socialists and anarchists have tried really hard to reclaim that word. It hasn't worked. Libertarians are just too popular. I don't know why they keep trying, but that's another vein for another time. So anarchists, to be as blunt as possible, they want decentralized rule. Whatever that means, you have no idea. I have no idea. It's up. The anarchists haven't succeeded in a revolution ever, so we don't know what's going on there. You could argue that the Zapatistas in southern Mexico, EZLN, National Zapatista Liberation Army, is the first anarchist state, quote unquote, the first anarchist group to successfully revolt, and the Mexican government just doesn't know how to defeat them. And they are governed entirely through localities. So the most powerful...
What do you mean by localities?
Yeah, the most powerful government force in the Zapatista territory is the local city council. And they all work in tandem with one another. They communicate between each other and they coordinate resources and efforts between each other, but there is no presiding figure or collective that governs all of them. They all are governed locally, usually by women. They try to make tribal elders that are women leaders.
Anarchists do?
Yes, the EZLN does at least.
And that's the EZLN is what?
The Zapatistas.
Okay, gotcha. In Mexico, right?
Yes, in Mexico.
Okay,
It still exists. They revolted in 1994, I believe, at the onset of Bill Clinton being elected. Very funny, actually.
Yeah. Bill Clinton's great, isn't he?
Right. What a guy. Really stellar.
What a guy.
Thanks for destroying Yugoslavia.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And anarchists believe that things should be governed locally, as locally as possible, in fact. And there are some branches of anarchism that get a little wonky. There are some that believe that all places should be governed by trade unions. Tradesmen aren't that big of a population anymore these days, so I don't know quite how that translates well. There are some that believe councils. So a traditional human council should be the pinnacle of human governance locally.
Would that human council you're referring to would be more of a direct democratic type of system?
So everyone votes, everyone has voting rights, vote in this council. There's a running joke with councils in anarchism that you would just have a council leading a council, leading a council, leading a council. But it's just fun banter. And anarchism emphasizes the individual, which is why I theorize it's so popular in America versus like Marxism, Leninism, because anarchism is about you. It's about how you want to live. And you should have the absolute maximum freedom to pursue your life however you want without the state getting in your way. And, to an average libertarian, this sounds erotic. This is like, oh, yes, great. But that's not true. Anarchists are also anti-racist. They don't like sexism, typically. They don't like transphobia. They don't like a bunch of they don't like discrimination. They think discrimination is also something the state does. And that the state, if it's destroyed, we can kind of effectively destroy these kinds of things. And it's so radically different from Maoism, Leninism, and Marxism that you could study anarchism and learn absolutely nothing about the other three ideologies, because it's such a unique, different way of looking at the world. And I would say that I have the honor of having many anarchist friends and, you know, comrades, if you want to get cheesy about it, because they will they'll give you the shirt off their backs. They're extremely idealistic, hopeful people that think that they have a chance, and it's inspiring. You know,
Can you be pro free market and an anarchist? Is that possible? Because my take, right, is that I don't know if I believe it, but from what I understand and what I've heard is that you can be free market, as in, we've talked about this, the whole idea about pluralism and whatnot, but the idea that the state in general makes capitalism bad, I guess, is something that I would advocate for, that I feel like that makes sense to me. But what do you think? Do you think that, because from what I'm hearing from you, it sounds more like you are arguing that the idea of capitalism fundamentally is wrong, and that more so corrupts the state. But what I would say is maybe the state corrupts the idea of a free market economy. What do you think about that idea?
Well, not to counter a question with a question, but I'm going to.
Yeah, please do.
If capitalism is antithetical to states, or if states are antithetical to capitalism.
And real quick, what do you mean by antithetical?
Antithetical, sorry, I should probably use language that's a little bit more concise. Opposed.
Gotcha. Yep.
Let's take the binary of the private citizen versus the state, you know?
Right.
Suppose that this is true. If the private citizen or the private market or the free market, if these things don't want the state to have control of it, why does the state exist still? I mean, it's been 300 years since early modern capitalism has been invented, and somehow we just haven't destroyed the state. Like, how come we don't have McDonald's governing one part of Missoula and, you know, the Iron Horse governing downtown?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, like, and you admitted to me earlier, you know, verbally, that the modern nation state developed during capitalist growth.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And the states often, I mean, the capitalists don't just hire private armies and attack places. They use the government to do that, you know?
Right.
Roosevelt might have been a trust buster, or not a trust buster. That is trust busting. I had a confusion of terms for a moment. Teddy Roosevelt might have been a trust buster, but his invasion of the Philippines enriched, you know, the American economy.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
And like, if the state isn't, you know, if the state is against capitalism, then why the hell did we ever go to the Middle East? You know, why did we ever procure all this oil?
The Anglo-Persian Oil Company and all that, back to the 1953 revolution. Yep.
If the state is such a terrible force for the free market, why do the stocks go higher when the state does something for capitalism? You know, it even from a surface level analysis, every time the state does something, I mean, yeah, you can go, oh, the taxes are higher, it's making the economy slow down. Taxes aren't going to destroy the free market. Taxes are to stop people from revolting. You use taxes to fund services and reforms that stop people from killing all of you. You don't just, you know, throw a tax. Maybe Mayor Engen might just throw a tax on something, just for fun.
Right, just for fun. Everybody loves Engen.
I don't.
No, fuck Engen.
I'll go off the record here to say that I'm not a big fan of Missoula's mayor. You know, some right-wingers are surprised by that, but I'm like, you know, you can't just tax things out of existence. It makes no sense. You know, we talk about Keynesian capitalism a lot, and, you know, a lot of people who like the free market are of the Austrian school of economics, and they're like, oh, the freer the markets, the freer the people. And everyone's read The Road to Serfdom and the Chicago Boys and Margaret Thatcher and Reagan, and you have all of these, you know, symbols and books and figures. But if Keynes didn't write his theory, I'm pretty confident capitalism would have collapsed just before World War II. I'm pretty confident.
Right. So you're arguing, okay, just for clarification,
Yes.
Keynes is supply side economics, correct? So that would be that spending is good, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
A general theory, I think it's the book called A General Theory on Money, Investment, and Something Else. Keynes' entire argument, if you guys want a complete honest blunt, is just spend your way to prosperity. Literally just spend. I mean,
Right.
Keynes is advocating you just create money, which is...
It doesn't work.
I gotta hand it to the guy. It's pretty bold. It's pretty ingenious.
It works.
This was the Great Depression, so these people were looking for anything at this point. You know, they were like,
fuck yeah, that works.
they were like, oh, this Keynes guy just says buy stuff, so I guess we'll do that.
Yeah.
And
fucking Keynes.
You know, and literally FDR read Keynes, ran for election.
Red DR?
Yes. Sorry.
I'm just kidding. I just
got me.
He was a commie.
Yeah, like Red DR. That's what you're saying. I was really confused. I was like, Red DR. Oh, FDR read Keynes and was like, oh, this is genius. And his entire platform was just make the government big, and spend. And you know, that's the spooky word for conservatives is big government.
Yeah.
Well, as much as people don't like the term big government, it sure as hell saved their asses from communist takeover. I'm going to tell you right now, when we talk about capitalists that have stopped communism from spreading, we talk about Keynes the most, because Keynes was like, make the state big and nothing will stop you.
Yeah.
And in 1936, there were coal miners declaring guerrilla war against the National Guard. I don't think the free market would have stopped that. It required the full force of the U.S. state to just crush these people.
That's what's interesting is when people talk about the free market. Like 9 out of 10 times, it's not a free market.
Yeah,
they are working with government regulation. Like if the government wasn't there to back capitalist movements, capitalist ideology, would it work? You know, like that's what people, I don't quite get. I don't think many people get that capitalism that we know today is not free. It is not a free market. Like it is, people say crony capitalism, which is, yeah, it's a good term. And I think honestly, even leftists would agree with that, right? Like that it is a free market controlled by the state, and without the state, this free market won't function the way that people think it will. People think that, oh, we're just got to live in a free market deregulation, but even the act of deregulating is regulation, because that's just something that I think a lot of people don't understand, that like, even when you're deregulating, the government is still coming in and setting policy, economic policy. So I don't know.
Yeah, and capitalism's primary goal is to spread commerce, right?
Spread commerce, you said?
Commerce, spread commerce, accrue profit. Well, you can't exactly do that without roads, without buildings that aren't burnt to the ground, without public safety, without making sure people aren't sick all the time. You need a bureaucratic apparatus to ensure the health of the citizenry. I mean, your workers can't produce if they're vomiting everywhere. They have to be healthy and sick, and not sick, healthy, and it's not like a slave master over here. They need to be sick, underfed, broken. They need to be healthy. They need to be well fed, and the state is the only group capable of doing that. And people oftentimes are
they have the force, right?
Yeah, they have the force. McDonald's isn't going to recruit its Mick militia, and March.
Mick militia, I like it. Yeah.
They're not going to do that. They're going to use their Whopper shotguns and and tell people buy our burgers and stop being poor bastards. They're going to have the police evict people.
Right.
No, they're going to be like, get out of here. This is property of McDonald's now. And we have a deed that McDonald's purchased from us, a bureaucratic state, saying that they own this land. You need to leave. We are enforcing their will.
Right. And wasn't that something, didn't Adam Smith not like the idea of property?
Yeah, Adam Smith hated landowners.
That's awesome. Me too.
Like landlords. Nobody likes landlords. Good God, I don't think I know a single person besides a landlord and their friends. I love landlords because they're just not fun to work with. You know, you have to govern your own living space monthly with these people. And Adam Smith, the supposed touter of capitalism, thought that Marx was correct when it came to like the labor theory of value. And that's a really abstract concept. I don't want to talk about LTV.
Let's not get into that right now.
But they both agreed that landlords sucked, and Adam Smith didn't like the fact that the English property owners just bought up all of the land in England. You know, the tragedy of the commons. You know, the selling off of public land in England. Adam Smith hated that. He thought landlords were parasites, and you know, arguably they are. But
right, Boston.
Yes.
So I'm going to now come to kind of just a closing question. Well, this isn't a closing question. This is just one I'd like to hear as short of an answer you can. Yeah. Who is your favorite historical figure?
Oh, that's tough.
I knew it would be one. That's why I wanted to ask you. I knew it'd be hard for you.
There are, and I'm going to go on a small stump speech here.
Please do.
You know, human history is so sporadic, and I think there's the often quoted adage of, you know, history repeats itself. And while I don't agree with that term specifically, for many reasons, I think that history is a story that can never be lived again, and that we are always creating new stories as we exist in this world. And there may be patterns that are similar. It's like if you open up any fiction book.
It doesn't repeat, it rhymes, you know?
Yeah, there's a fiction book. Every fiction book kind of takes from one another. And it's the same thing with human history. You know, it's not the same, but there are some echoes. And for me, I am impressed every day, regardless of the context, in the way that like human beings act. I think that we are some of the most egalitarian, thoughtful, intelligent people that the universe will probably ever see. Even if we don't make it off this planet, we are going to be legendary. And no matter any, you know, at least we tried to do something about the injustices of nature and create a society that destroyed Darwinism. We wanted to go beyond all limitations that nature put on us. And to pick a single person out of this entire collective of people who has just tried so hard to make the life and the world better for them, that's difficult.
Yeah,
but I think of off the top of my head. I mentioned Thomas Sankara earlier, West African Marxist, Burkinabe specifically, one of my favorites. I like Paulo Freire, a Brazilian socialist who basically talked about how the Prussian style of education is wrong and it's not good.
Great.
Let me find someone that's a little bit less, you know, Marxist and just generally a decent person. I really like, what's their name? Oh yes, there is a girl in World War II that seduced Nazis, and while seducing them, she murdered them. She killed like tons of Nazis. Very, very intelligent. And she was like 16 years old. Cool. One of my favorites. Another is, let me think. There's this
her name.
What?
Do you have that 16-year-old's name that would fucking kill Nazis, which is awesome?
No, I do not remember her name. I
got it. No worries.
I will send you her name later. Cool. But she's great. There's a gay Dutchman in World War II who the Nazis took over the Netherlands, and the Nazis wanted to exterminate the LGBT community. That was one of their the pink triangle, the upside down pink triangle. That's a symbol of trauma for the LGBT community because that was the.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, the pink triangle is the insignia that the Nazis gave homosexuals in the concentration camps. Um, and there was this Dutch gay man who refused to go to the camps. He was like, fuck you guys, this is bullshit, I am not going, because he knew he was gonna die. He knew like this was it. And I'm pretty confident he gets executed, but before that, he leads the resistance in the Netherlands and like, just makes the Nazi officials' lives there a living hell. And they finally capture him, and his last words are, "Let it be known that like gay people are not cowards." Like, I am here, I am fighting, I have fought the most disgusting empire on earth, and I am a victim of it, but at least I went out with a bang, and people can't just say that gay men or gay women are weak.
Right.
And that's a very uplifting story. And I'm not straight, I'm bisexual.
Right.
And that doesn't have anything to do with what I'm saying, except for the fact that, like, for me in particular, that's just nice to hear, that.
Yeah, no, I understand. Like, that's someone who has similar, what would it be, sexual orientation that is like fighting for the right of people, because whether you like it or not, gay people, bisexual people, they have been oppressed.
Yes.
Throughout history, like they have been, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. And that's just the crux of it, is there are so many people in this world who have done so many meaningful things and still are every single day. And a lot of them we don't even know about. Impressive how kind we are as a people. And at the end of the day, I talked with an anarchist friend like, a few weeks ago, and we were talking about how successful, we think, spreading ideology would be. And one of the things they said was, minus all the propaganda, minus all the things that we have taught ourselves in the United States, most people are genuinely decent human beings. Most people, by far. The idea that we're all against each other and out for ourselves, I just don't think is true. And I think I would rather celebrate the collective suffering and successes of our people across the planet than I would ever try to uplift a single figure, And I think that's what history has taught me, is that there are some great figures, there are some cool figures, there are some badasses, there are some tragic figures. But the only thing that unites all this is that we have is experience. We all live it. Mortality. We all die in the end, and we all try our best to make the most out of what we've been given, regardless of how shitty the world is. There are people who have come from awful backgrounds who have just become stellar examples of human existence, and vice versa. Some have come from very privileged backgrounds and have become awful people, and vice versa. There are privileged people who become great. There are, oppressors or oppressed peoples that become terrible. Pol Pot, for example. I think that's how I feel. I gave you some examples, but I think collectively humans are just impressive, and I think we should celebrate ourselves every day.
Austin, let me get to these closing questions, because I have probably fucking 35, 40 questions. I really wish we just had unlimited time. But also, with your friends who are anarchists and stuff, please, 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 please give my information along to them. If anyone you might know might be interested in talking, discussing, it's going to be the same type of thing. Just kind of hearing, what I want are different perspectives, is what I want.
Yes.
Might not necessarily agree, but I just want different perspectives. But okay, so personally, just so people know, what are your plans after you are you getting a BA in history right now?
Yes, I just put in my graduation application.
Nice. That's exciting.
I know, I'm very excited. A little grumpy that they're charging me like $40 to apply for graduation. Yep. Very odd.
Well, I hear they don't charge you enough already.
Oh, God. I'm glad you're joking, because that made me pop a nerve. I didn't even think about it. I applied, and then I was like, that's happening. Oh, okay.
That's awesome. So is that going to be this spring you're graduating?
Yes, this spring. I'm taking a year off. I don't even want to think about school for a year.
Good call.
I'm taking a gap year. I'm saying, screw it. I'm going to go to Saudi Arabia or some Turkey or some place where I can just forget about the United States for a second, vibe on my own, have some fun.
Take 2 years. Hey, Boston, you know what you should do?
Yeah, I should hit up Vegas.
You should move down to Las fucking Vegas, dude.
I would love to come visit you. And I think
yeah, come visit anytime, Boston. You got a place to stay. If you want a hotel room, they're cheap too. But yeah, seriously, the offer's always open.
I would be totally down with that. And once I find some time, I would love to do that. But my plan is to take a gap year, and then look for grad school.
Yeah.
The academic job market is awful, and it's going to remain awful for as long as I'm alive, probably.
Yeah, probably.
And I know that going in. If I fail to secure a job in the academic job market, I will probably have to suck it up and work for the government, which is not going to be nice. But it's
be a fucking bureaucrat, right?
Yeah, I will become a bureaucrat, and that will not be fun.
Real quick, what do you envision yourself? So you, correct me if I'm wrong, you want to eventually get a PhD in history, correct?
Yes.
So would you try to get your go to graduate school for history?
Yes,
or is it more specified than that? Is it like American history, European, or can you get your graduate degree in just history?
You can get a graduate degree probably in like history, but you're required to specialize. The nature of historical academia these days, we know so much about the world that there's no possible way you could just get a general PhD in history. There's too much information for you to reasonably consume in order to have a PhD in that way.
Build a dissertation and all that.
Dissertations are already monstrosities. I can't imagine doing a dissertation any bigger than they already are. And they require you to specialize in some way, usually a region. I am pushing it back against, there's a new trend where you need to specialize in a type of history on top of it. So like a social historian, an economic historian, a cultural historian, a military historian. I think that's dangerous. I think you should be able to effectively understand all
those things you just listed are all very interconnected, right?
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Common sense from somebody finally. They're all interconnected in ways that we only began to understand this thanks to Marx. Regardless of his political leanings, he was one of
a big impact on the idea of historical thinking.
Yeah, I met a professor who isn't a Marxist, he's a liberal, and he said this outright. Whether or not you like Marx, he has greatly influenced the way the humanities understand the world. So
absolutely. Because don't they call Marx the father of socialism? Not socialism.
Sociology.
Sociology, yes.
Yeah,
thank you.
He has massively broadened the way we understand the world in ways that we didn't even know we could. And there are others too. Max Weber, they're very common sociologists, people who don't like Marx. Weber's the other person.
Yeah.
He's the proprietor of order theory. And Emil Durkheim, I think Durkheim has some pretty left-wing influences. I haven't read a lot of Durkheim. He's my weakest read in sociology, so I'm talking out of my ass here. But yeah, I ideally want to become a professor, specialize, but try to keep a general knowledge as best as I can in my free time. And ideally, I would like to help reform academia in a way that is more like educational, less closed off. I think academics are prone to elitism, and I think
absolutely.
That's dangerous. And I think. And I'm a poor working class kid from Wyoming, and I want to be an academic. I don't ever want to separate myself from the people. I don't. That's my worst nightmare. I want education to be as accessible and open to all people as possible. I wish you could just go to a trade school, do your carpentry, come home, and then read a book that's like chock full of historical information. You can understand it right away. I want that to be the future. Unfortunately, that is not quite attainable right now. There are a lot of very just esoteric, strange, weird, historical books that people just don't get because no one writes them in ways that are understandable. I mean, even try reading Marx's Capital. That thing's a brain beater.
Yeah, it's Das Kapital. Yeah.
Yeah, it's horrible. It needs to be way more understandable and, easier to read. And
it's almost like you have to already be committed to the ideology and like be interested so much in it that you would actually spend the time reading Das Kapital. Whereas it should be, well, I don't know if it should, but fuck it. I think it should be more, all information, all knowledge should be more accessible to everybody.
I think a human being is stronger the more they know, and not
absolutely
of facts, but rather an enhancing of an understanding. You know,
right.
A lot of people like history, and all they know how to do is to say facts that they know, and it's like, yeah, you know things about history, but what can you draw from these conclusions? You know, what can you
like? What good does that do?
Yeah,
like, what good is your understanding of history?
Yeah. Does it, and historical understanding can expand your personal life too. You can understand.
Absolutely.
It's super helpful in so many ways, and it can help you get out of legal disputes. It can help you save your marriage. You can do all sorts of crazy things with historical understanding. But yeah, that's my plan, is to get into education and try my best to be a part of the group of people that makes it more accessible and enjoy my life, make money while I do it.
I like it. Another question. Who, in your opinion, is going to win the presidential election in 2016 or 2020?
Oh man, I wish it was 2016.
Yeah, right.
I feel I got my back to the wall with this one.
Oh yeah, I'm putting you on the spot. Who do you think's gonna win? Who's gonna pull it off? Joseph or Donnie?
So the poll numbers for Hillary always made it look like she was gonna win by a landslide.
I was shocked when she lost.
And electorally, she did not win by a landslide, but popular vote-wise, she won by 2 million votes, which is a landslide. That's a pretty big margin.
Yeah, that's a lot of people.
Yeah. The problem is that she didn't win them strategically, which, criticisms of the Electoral College aside, she didn't win.
Fuck Hillary Clinton.
But yeah. Terrible. I don't like her. I hate when people call her a communist. I want to get upset when people do. She's not.
She's not at all.
Her and her husband conspired to destroy the last communist state in Europe. So I don't
Yugoslavia,
yeah. But I think Joe Biden's going to win. I genuinely think that he has a chance. And it's not because Trump is so terrible that like nobody likes him. It's that Trump came in with a very strong message and then he didn't govern like he had one.
The Obama factor.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He came in with a very strong message of what he was going to do, and then he did like none of it, and that has essentially just pissed everybody off.
Right.
Also, he's not very good at PR. He's very Trump. Trump is not good at PR.
Yeah.
Trump is very easily attacked, and he doesn't take attacks well. He explodes pretty quickly.
He's a narcissist. He doesn't like. I mean, at the very least, right?
I would discount the fact that I'm a Marxist. Just forget that for a second. From a personality level, Trump is just an unstable guy.
I agree with that. Yeah.
His cabinet now isn't even the same people from when he came in. That's a pretty
Yeah, he's had so many fires, so many resignations. It's crazy.
You have to think when was it this bad? And it was this was when Hoover was in power. Was when it was this bad.
I hear after Hoover though the country was really well off. Great Depression, just in case anybody didn't know, right? Hoover was the last president before.
Oh, you're getting me with today. I'm like, Dylan, where the hell did you hear that from?
Dylan, that's wrong.
I was like, what? We didn't ever get a chicken in every pot. That didn't work.
Chicken Hoovervilles.
And Biden is a bumbling fool. Don't get me wrong. I think he's hilarious. I used a malarkey in a Zoom call the other day, and everyone mocked me for it, just because I think he's a funny guy. He's an old senile.
He is malarkey. Yep.
He's just this old senile corporate Democrat that wants nothing but to just win and occasionally pass some, silly laws that sort of do things and sort of do nothing all at the same time, which is what the Democrats have always done. And they're I need them to stop existing, right? I'd rather deal with Republicans who actually believe in what they say.
Well, I just quoted you the other day on Facebook. I said, a friend of mine, Boston, said that Democrats are just better liars. And that is such a great quote. It is they are. Republicans are better at being just upfront about being assholes. Democrats are just better at pretending.
I would much rather be in a bar with a Republican and be like, hey, you're wrong. I'm going to tell you why. And they're like, hey, you're wrong. I'm going to tell you why. A liberal will come up to me and be like, I see what you're saying, but I think no, you don't see what I'm saying. Stop saying that. You don't see shit. Just say you disagree with me and then use the police to kill me or something. Come on. like stop pretending that this is some sort of game to you. There's a Malcolm X quote that's very good. That talks about white liberals and moderates and things like that. And he says, you know, and this is in regard to racism and segregation. He talks about the Civil Rights Act being like lame. It's not good enough. And he says, you know, if you stick a knife 12 inches in my back, right?
Mm-hmm.
You pull the knife out 3 inches. That's not progress.
Okay. Yep.
You pull the knife out 7 inches. That's not progress. The knife is still there. You pull the knife out all the way. That's not progress. The wound hasn't even healed. The problem in America is that no one even knows the knife is there.
Now, is that part of the Malcolm X quote, or are you adding to that?
No, that's the full Malcolm X quote.
Okay, gotcha. I gotcha. Okay.
But he's talking about how, you know, liberals are prone to being like, oh, I'm sorry. What are you sorry for? Fix the ghettos. You know,
Right.
like if you think Black Lives Matter, where is the healthcare reform? Where is the minimum wage increase? Where is the, you know, stop redlining, make housing affordable, stop gentrification?
What do you mean by redlining?
So redlining, again, I'll let you do your closing remarks here soon, but redlining is a practice done primarily during the F.D.R. Period. It started in F.D.R.'s period because he created the Federal Housing Administration, or the Federal Housing Bureau, whatever the original thing was called.
Yeah.
And what they did was they crossed off entire sections of the map and said, this is where Black people will live, or this is where the Black people do live. And those communities just weren't invested in. Corporations were like, oh, FDR said that this is where all the Black people live, so we're just not going to put our money in these communities. And like, I mean, basic things like grocery stores, you know, things that people need to have in their areas. Grocery companies were like, we're not going to put our money there because the Blacks live there. It's the same thing with real estate developers. They were like, oh no, the Black people live there. We can't develop those homes. That's where the Black people live. And this is another instance of where the corporations and the state just work together perfectly. They're like, oh, great. We can invest in white communities. And the state will remain white, and the state will remain powerfully white and entrench segregation and Jim Crow. And the corporations didn't protest to that. They were like, oh yes, that's great. Perfect. Awesome. We'll just give our money to white neighborhoods right away. And Democrats have never, ever fix this, ever. And people will be like, oh, FDR's a Democrat, so this means Democrats are more racist. That's not true either. Like, your political affiliation doesn't exactly make you less. There are Marxists that are racist. I don't get why. I don't understand how you could pick an ideology that says, oh, we should have freedom for all people, and then be like, actually not these people. Like, what? Excuse me, you missed the memo here. But it exists, and racism is an ideology that's not particularly exclusive to one, you know, subset of people. You might find more racism among fascists, obviously, because they're fascists, or Nazis, but you can find racism in almost any political group. And I think Democrats are just as racist as Republicans are in many cases, because Democrats will pretend to do something about it and then nothing is done. Like, Obama told everyone to calm down after Michael Brown was murdered, and like all these Black people voted for Obama thinking that like, oh, this is going to be great. This is, you know, we have a Black man in office. Racism is over. Someone called us a post-racial society, which biggest load of crap since Francis Fukuyama's End of History essay. That didn't work out well either. The Taliban existed, and Fukuyama was like, never mind.
And Boston, I'm going to have to cut you off. No. I am getting so tired.
Please shut both of us up. We are having
we are talking too much. We're just going off. I can do this for like 4 more hours, but you know,
we can edit some.
Have limitations. So, Boston, I would like to say thank you very much for being my first interview for Historical Ripples. I think you are one of the people in this world who are going to drop a pebble in the water and are going to create ripples eventually. I think you are. I think you already are. But I think you are an incredible human who knows a lot of things, knows how to defend their arguments, which is awesome. And I really can't thank you enough for doing this. And little disclaimer, this will not be the first time I'm sure we're talking and have it, because I have about 30 more questions I want to get to. I think I got to maybe like 4 or 5. Yeah, no, this was fantastic though. I really enjoyed speaking with you, and I'm so glad that you did this. You got a busy schedule, you got a lot of stuff going on, so it's cool you made time for this. I really appreciate it.
Of course, it's an honor. Truly, I'm going to reiterate. I am extremely grateful for this opportunity. I am honored. I'm very happy, not just as an interview but as a friend to do this with you and to just bond with you in ways that I didn't even expect to bond with you in. And I hope that whoever listens, whenever, wherever, that much is learned in any perspective from both of us, and that your podcast will go a long way and provide many great examples of historical discourse for many people across the planet. And I will continue to support and work with you on this project as much as you would like me to.
Awesome.
I'm indebted to you for allowing me a platform. And I am extremely grateful that you have provided not just me with this opportunity, but for the world, for people to listen to it. That's a very bold undertaking, and I commend you for that.
You're making me blush, Boston. Thank you.
Hey,
I appreciate it. But like, one thing I want to make clear is I'm just trying to be an avenue for people to display it and to say what they think about whatever it is they might think, revolving around history, obviously. But no, I mean, realistically, without you, you have helped me a lot think about history and think about different things. And Boston and I probably text daily just about random historical things, and it's mostly me kind of just asking what he thinks about things. And I can't say thank you enough. This has been awesome, Boston. I really appreciate it. And I just want to say thank you so much for helping me drop a pebble in this water that we call society. So I would encourage anyone who has listened to this or is thinking about listening to this to please reach out to me if you're interested in having a conversation about something related to history. And remember that as we are speaking, we are dropping a pebble in this historic water. And thank you so much, Boston, for this. I really appreciate it. We're going to schedule something again soon, I hope, and we will get some more questions. So thank you very much, Boston. Again, this is Boston Sullivan. If you would like to reach out to him, please reach out to me, and I'll pass along information, all that. Yeah, you can find me. Just send me an email at dylanhaggart@historicalripples.com. Shoot me a text at 406-370-4713. And yeah, that's a wrap. All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this and helping me drop a pebble in this historic water. Have a great night.